7:11 p.m. 10/19/2024. I'm going to put a timestamp so you guys, if anybody's interested in hearing what I'm about to read, you can skip this rambling. Just finished The Goddess yesterday, which semi reminded me of Mildred Pierce a little bit. And I don't know if they're at all alike. It's been a minute since I've seen Mildred Pierce, but some kind of perpetual life cycle that somebody needs to break was interesting. The ending was interesting and a little bit devastating. I was going to say somewhat predictable, but not entirely. But I liked it. And somebody has uploaded The Goddess to YouTube, and I'd like to watch it. But something interesting's happened to where I'm trying to watch the plays I'm reading, but I'm outpacing the films by what I'm reading, and that's kind of the time that's happened in a while, to which I'm pleasantly surprised and delighted. Let's see. I haven't read Gideon, The Passion of Joseph D., The Latent Heterosexual. I haven't read Network, but I think I'm going to turn to the television plays, because we have a bunch of television plays that are smaller plays, clearly because they have to fit in a certain time frame, probably an hour after commercials, probably like 40 some minutes. And I can only assume these were, unless there's a foreword or a preface, these were, there has to be credits somewhere. There is a author's notes, so maybe that'll tell me, like, when it was featured, like the date it was featured and under what program. Okay, but I'm not going to read those author's notes until after I read the plays, because it'll probably give spoilers, and I don't want to spoil it. So, I've never read Holiday Song, Printer's Measure, The Big Deal, Marty, The Mother Bachelor Party. So, and this is interesting because I have Marty, the television play, and I have Marty, the screenplay. And, looking, hang on. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm curious to see how many differences there are. I'm gonna skip to it real quick here. 183, is it really? Marty, 2 choices of material. I don't know. I'm not going to read that till after, because I don't want to spoil it. Okay. I'm just going to go in order. There's Holiday Song, Printer's Measure, The Big Deal, Marty, the Mother, the Bachelor Party. So we're going to start out with the Holiday Song. And I'm going to read the foreword. And so this is probably where I'll skip to in a timestamp. All right. Collected works of Paddy Chayefsky, the television plays. Foreword. There are a number of allusions in the theatrical mediums that are unnecessary and artificial and sometimes in the way. One of these is the idea that the writer has a paternalistic attitude toward his scripts. People in the theater like to describe the writer's play as his baby, and they refer to his creative struggles as his birth pains. Most writers I know are not so involved with their scripts, especially in television, where the constant urgency of time does not allow for the self-indulgent mannerisms usually associated with the creative spirit. If the writer has to cut 5 minutes, he simply cuts it, or someone else will cut it for him. In television, the writer is treated with a peculiar mixture of mock deference and outright contempt. He is rarely consulted about casting, his scripts are frequently mangled without his knowing about it, and he is certainly the most poorly paid person in the production. Some programs don't allow the writer to attend rehearsals of his own show. At the same time, he is granted the proud title of playwright, and in every respect but his work, he is treated with a dignity inherited from the stage. When a television writer has an idea for a script, he has first to submit it in the form of an outline. This is read by the producer, the director, and/or the script editor of the program. The writer is then called in for a conference with one or another of the production staff, and revisions are suggested to him. My own experience has been that these conferences are a waste of time. For one thing, the writer has only a nebulous concept of his proposed script, no matter how meticulously he has prepared his outline. No writer I know knows literally what he is going to write until the first stumbling scenes of the first act have been written and his characters have begun to assume a physical reality to him. I have never written an outline that retained its rigid structure all the way into a final draft. Scenes that I reckoned to be 8 pages in length turn out to be 6 lines of dialogue, and scenes I never conceived suddenly demand to be written. Most writers count on the impetus of their dialogue to disgorge new lines of dramatic movement, new insights into their characters, and even a new tone or flavor to the overall script. Outlines do serve a vital function for the writer in that they keep him from plunging into the actual writing before he has thought out a general line for his story. But no outline should ever be used as a basis for judgment. Nevertheless, outlines are almost always required by every program. The producers and the advertising agencies representing the sponsors do not know the work of their writers well enough to trust them, and with some justification want an indication of what they are paying for. In any event, the outline is submitted and the writer either makes a living or not on the basis of it. When the writer has revised his outline, he submits it again. If approved by the producer and director, it is forwarded on to the advertising agency. I have no idea what happens to it here, but it usually stays here for about a week or 10 days or longer and is studied. Not for its theatrical merit, but for its palatability. The advertising agencies are not villains whose sole purpose is to destroy the artistic integrity of a dramatic script. But, by definition, they are concerned with selling their clients' products, and the 22 or 53 minutes of drama that go between the commercials are considered an essentially part of the sales talk. The agency is most concerned with neither offending nor disturbing possible customers, a policy that stringently limits the scope of television drama. The taboos of television, though much is made out of them, are really no those governing the movies or the slick magazine short story. Only on the Broadway stage or in the novel form there is any freedom of topic, and even the stage has produced little in the last 10 years that could not have been done on television. At any rate, the outline is either accepted or rejected by the advertising agency, or it is returned with more revisions suggested. Eventually, the writer is faced with the problem of transforming his outline into a script. At least 2 weeks, and probably a good deal more, have passed since he handed in his original outline. Whatever artificial enthusiasm he had for his story has long since evaporated. But he sits down to his typewriter and begins to regenerate his energy. Like every other member of the theatrical mediums, the writer has to lift himself into a suspended attitude of work. He has no discipline but his own training and his need for money. Writing is a compulsive type of work. No writer I know wakes up in the morning with eager anticipation for the day's work. Each writer develops his own series of little morning habits which graduate into the business of sitting down to his typewriter. Actually, the work of writing a given script is the easiest part of the writer's life. It is on those dreary and empty mornings between scripts when he awakens to an amorphous world of aimless thinking, of poking about into the unformed recesses of the air about him for a new thought, a new character, an incident, a fragment of feeling, anything to start him off. It is on these mornings that the writer considers other trades. Right now, of course, the writer has this accepted outline to do, a concrete chore. He reads through the outline and he sets about conceiving his first scene. My own experience in television has been confined almost exclusively to the hour-length drama, and to one specific program at that, the Philco Goodyear Playhouse. I enjoy writing television a good deal for personal reasons, and because the Philco Goodyear Playhouse allows me to write as well as I care to. Most of my friends are not so lucky. They write for shows that demean their talents or twist their good work when they do put effort into it. They feel very little pleasure when they set out on their first act. They work from under a hard coat of defensive unconcern, finding whatever reward they can in the mechanical excellence of their craft rather than in their artistry. They affect the attitude of the skilled artisan, and they go about their work with the diffident detachment of a carpenter. It is a laborious kind of writing with very few kicks in it. The patterns of creation are always the same. There are some writers who can block out a danger or a suspense idea for you in half an hour. Most writers take from 2 to 5 days to hack out a half-hour script. In the hour-length shows, the demands are somewhat greater, depending on the program. Philco Goodyear expects a certain amount of artistic effort. I have spent 2 months in plotting out one or another of the scripts collected in this volume. Sometimes they come easier, sometimes harder, but no script has ever come without intensive work. When the script is finished, the writer brings it in to the director and the producer. Again, script conferences are called, revisions suggested. The mood of these conferences varies with the personalities involved. In my case, I have been almost childishly dependent upon the reactions of Fred Coe, the producer, at this writing of the Playhouse, Gordon Duff and Bill Nichols, his associates, and Delbert Mann, who usually directs my shows. By the time I have finished my first draft, I have long since lost my perspective and will accept just about any suggestion they make. It must be made clear that these 4 men are inordinately talented at their jobs. I don't believe there is a better story mind in the business than Fred Coe's. Delbert Mann is an extremely gifted director who has a precise affinity for my kind of writing, and a sharp understanding of his own needs in conveying the values of the script to the actors and cameramen. Most dramatic programs are not so efficiently organized. Some shows present their suggestions for revisions as mandatory, and if the writer cannot satisfy, the director or producer may peremptorily rewrite the script himself. Certainly, once the script goes into rehearsal, unless the writer is there to do the rewriting and cutting, the director and even the actors will butcher it for him. On those shows that keep the writer out of rehearsals, most of the scripts end up a bloody business indeed, and the writer who takes his work seriously will be sick to his stomach when he sees what comes out on the television screen. A writer must attend rehearsals for his own self-respect, and because so much can be done. If all directors were superior talents, if all actors were uncommonly gifted, and if all scripts were flawless, then the writer could sit comfortably at home and begin a new script. But despite the currently over-evaluated concept of the director, he is a mundane man like the rest of us, and as limited in his ability. And actors as a class are perhaps the least realistic people alive, and no script is ever flawless. The transformation of the written word into a full-bodied moment of reality is a vast one. Words that read well on paper are often dull gasps of literature in the actor's mouth. The actor may find his part incomprehensible or beyond his own sense of reality. The words have to be changed, the scenes reconceived. Rehearsals can be the best part of television, for this is where the real fascination of theater lies, in the quick, nervous, day-to-day maturation of a script, in the sometimes incredible blossoming of actors as they wrench their roles open and expose innumerable hidden subtleties. There is nothing in the professional world to compare a bunch of responsive theater people engaged in a genuinely cooperative work. On the other hand, nothing is more miserable than those rehearsals in which everyone concerned has contempt for the script, himself, and the entire production. Of course, I work with a director who likes me and will accept my meddling. If your director is defensive or belligerent, as is more frequently the case, there is little you can do. The point is to find a producer you respect and a director you can. The personalities in any theatrical medium are edgy and difficult, or they wouldn't be in the theater in the first place. Generally, however, it is possible to feel out productive workaday relationships, and rehearsals can be fun and the final show a reasonably proud piece of work. Well, the show is done. 10 minutes after the last commercial, the actors have vanished and the studio is empty. Anywhere from a month to 6 months have gone by since the writer submitted his first outline. He has put perhaps 3 weeks to 3 months of concentrated work into the show. For his troubles, he will have received as little as $300 for some half-hour shows, and as much as the $3,000 reserved for the better-known hour dramatists. A successful hour dramatist may do 4, 5, or 6 shows a year with a very thin hope, of selling one of his scripts to the movies, provided he has been careful enough to keep the rights to his work. He may make as much as $25,000 in a top year. For this, he has written the equivalent of 3 full-act plays. He has no guarantee that his next year will be as fruitful. In fact, most writers live in a restrained terror of being unable to think up their next idea. Very few television writers can seriously hope to keep up a high-level output for more than 5 years. Television is an endless, almost monstrous drain. How many ideas does a writer have? How many insights can he make? How deep can he probe into himself? How much energy can he activate? For my part, television has been a kind medium. I came out of the legitimate theater and I want to go back again. When I do, I will not be able to calculate the debt I owe to television for the amount of sheer craft I have learned in these past 2 years. I have achieved a discipline and a preciseness of thinking, and even a certain notoriety, upon which every writer feeds, whether he admits it or not. I have never written a script in television of which I was not at least partially proud. I hope to continue writing for the medium as long as I can. Paddy Chayefsky, December 1954. Holiday Song, 1952. Directed by Gordon Duff, produced by Fred Coe. Act 1. Montage. Suburban town outside New York. Quiet shaded streets, etc. Dissolved to simple square synagogue. Dissolved to announcement box, meticulous little white lettering. High Holy Day services, Wednesday, Thursday, September 9th and 10th. Erev Rosh Hashanah, Wednesday evening, 7:16 p.m. Services will be conducted by Cantor Leon Sternberger. The camera narrows down on name Cantor Leon Sternberger. Dissolved to photograph of Cantor Sternberger in full robes of his office. Camera moves back. We are in a plain living room. Cantors don't make very much money. The camera carefully pokes about the dimly lit room. It picks up the high, black, turreted Cantor's hat resting on a chair beside a hat brush, then the long white robes on an ironing board. They are being carefully ironed by a woman in her middle 30s. This is Naomi, Cantor Sternberger's niece. For a moment, we watch her, nearsighted and intense, ironing the Cantor's robes. The doorbell rings. She looks up, carefully sets the iron into a harmless position, and nervously hurries to answer the door. An elderly man of 60, bird-like, and at the moment apparently concerned over something, stands in the doorway. This is Zucker. Zucker. Well, what's the matter? Naomi, agitated. Shh. Shh. She closes the door behind Zucker. Zucker. Well, what's wrong? Is he sick? What's the matter? Naomi. He's been lying in his bed for 2 days, looking at the ceiling. Like I told you over the phone, I bring him in his meals. He doesn't touch a thing. I ask him, are you fasting? What holiday is it that you're fasting? He looks at me like a dying man. Then he looks back at the ceiling. Zucker. Did you call a doctor? Naomi. I asked him, I said, Uncle Leon, are you sick? Shall I call a doctor? He lies there, Mr. Zucker. I don't know what to do. Zucker. All right. Let's sit down a minute, and you'll tell me what happened from the beginning. They take seats at either end of the living room table. Naomi. Like I told you over the phone. Zucker. What happened? He came home from the synagogue? Naomi. He came home from the synagogue. Zucker. This was Sunday? Naomi. This was Sunday. Zucker. All right. He came home. What happened? Naomi. I was in the kitchen making a roast. It's Sunday, you know. On Sunday, I make roasts. So I hear the door open and close. I look up. There he is. He's white as a sheet. I said, Uncle Leon, what's the matter? So he looks at me. God alone knows what's the matter, he cries. And he goes in his room and he closes the door. Zucker. Well, you know what happened. Window in the synagogue. Naomi. When was this? Zucker. I'm telling you, this was Sunday. The two of us were standing there talking to the rabbi when whoever it was threw the stone in the window. All the glass came crashing down at our feet. Well, listen, it was a dreadful experience. A sensitive man like your uncle, well, I could see he was disturbed by the whole incident. And the rabbi said, Cantor, you don't look well. Go home and lie down. Naomi. So he came home and he lay down and he hasn't come out in 2 days. And listen, Mr. Zucker, tomorrow night is Rosh Hashanah, the high holiday. Zucker. I know. Naomi. I said to him, Uncle Leon, tomorrow night you've got to go to the synagogue. You've got to sing. And he looks at me like, Zucker. All right, I'll talk to him. Naomi. I didn't know what to do, so I called you, Mr. Zucker. Zucker. I'll talk to him. I'll talk to him. He sits a moment, frowning in contemplation. Then, pursing his lips, he rises slowly from his chair. What shall I do? Shall I knock or shall I go right in? Naomi, rising too, crosses to door to the Cantor's room. Wait, I'll look, see if he's asleep. She carefully opens the door, peeks in, then calls softly and with gentleness. Uncle Leon, Mr. Zucker, the sexton, is here. He wants to talk to you. Uncle Leon? She waits for an answer. There is none. She comes softly back to Zucker. He's sitting in his chair now. Zucker nods nervously. All right, I'll go in and talk to him. takes a deep breath, advances on the door, opens it, bends in. Cantor? Cantor, this is Zucker here. I understand you don't feel well. I'd like to come in and talk to you a minute. He stares anxiously across the simple, bare, unlit room to the chair. The camera follows his gaze across the floor, up the side of the chair, to the rigid form sitting thereon. This is Cantor Sternberger, a gentle little man in his 50s, a scholar, generally confused by the outside world. His lean, sensitive face is gaunt with inner pain. Deep, pained eyes regard Zucker in the doorway. The head nods involuntarily a few times, then slowly reverts to its previous position of staring fixedly at the floor. Zucker darts one anxious glance back into the living room, where Naomi is nervously ironing away, and softly closes the door and pads to the canter. Zucker, with deep compassion. Hello, Leon. How are you, my dear friend? What is it that troubles you, my friend? Your niece was so worried she called me on the phone. She said, "Come over right away, my uncle won't eat anything." Is it the broken window in the synagogue that has affected you so much? The anguished head remains motionless. Don't worry about the window. It will surely be replaced before the services tomorrow night. The gentle, pained face turns to Zucker, and the eyes fill with tears. The cantor stares at his old friend in mute objection. Would you like me to turn on the light for you? You don't want to sit here in the dark. Would you like me to leave, Leon? Would you like to be alone? He leans forward, waiting for an answer. There is none. Zucker slowly shuffles to the door. He reaches for the knob. The cantor. Zucker! Zucker, stay here with me. Zucker turns at the door. Zucker. Sure, Leon. He comes quickly back. The cantor. I'm sorely afflicted, Zucker. Zucker. I tell you, Leon, for some time now I have noticed that you seem to be moody and brooding. The cantor. I have fasted for 2 days, Zucker. You used to be such a cheerful fellow. Everybody used to say, "Here comes Cantor Sternberger, now we'll have a few jokes." But I don't see you laugh no more. The cantor. What's to laugh? He rises from his chair and pads to the bed. On the bed table lies a newspaper. He picks it up. Here, Zucker, read. Read. Read any page. Did something nice happen in the world today? Murder, graft, a pageant of oppression, famines and wars. I defy you to find me one pleasure in all those words. Zucker. Well, listen, these are terrible times. The cantor. What's on the radio? Let's listen. A murder? A death? A war? Zucker. My friend, it is not up to us to discern the will of God. The cantor. The will of God, with growing fervor. Is God a mortician, Zucker, that he desires all this tragedy? Zucker. It says in Isaiah, "And ye shall be scattered over the earth, and ye shall tremble before your enemies like an aspen leaf." The cantor, crying out. Why? Zucker. Because God in his infinite wisdom willed it so. The cantor, trembling with emotion. What kind of a God wills so much misery? Zucker, unnerved by the turn of the conversation, looks uneasily at the cantor, then away. The cantor moves shakily to his old friend, his eyes wide with some unknown fear. Zucker. My friend, I am not a scholar, but did I not read in the book of Job? What? Should we accept the good alone from God and the evil we should not accept? The cantor. Zucker, I believe I have lost my faith. Zucker. What do you mean you have lost your faith? The Cantor. I have lost my faith. Zucker. What do you mean you have lost your faith? The Cantor. I mean that I'm sitting here and I'm doubting the existence of the Almighty One. There. It is out. The two old friends stare at each other in shock and consternation. Zucker, you have known me from my earliest days in the seminary. We were always as brothers to each other. If I could not tell them this to you, to whom could I tell it? Zucker. My friend, my dear friend, the Cantor. All my life, Zucker, you have known me as an upright man. I have feared God, and I have eschewed evil. Zucker. Sternberger, believe me, the Cantor. I have never questioned or doubted. When my parents died in a natural death, I did not sin with my lips or attribute any injustice to God. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh. May the name of the Lord be blessed. Then suddenly, it was like I went to bed one night and I woke up the next morning and I was thinking, what sadness in this world. I seemed to hear nothing or see nothing but sadness. And at night I would hear in my head like a drum, God, God, God. What sort of a God is it who would allow this? I would awake in the night and desperately try to pray. And in the darkness of the room I felt a moment of peace. But it would come again into my mind like a drum. What kind of God is this? What kind of God is this? What kind of God is this? Crying out in anguish, Zucker, I am sorely afflicted. Zucker. Leon, if you don't mind, please. I would like a glass of tea. Dissolve to living room, close-up of teapot. Dolly back to Naomi as she crosses the room and serves tea to Zucker and the Cantor, who are now sitting at the table. Zucker. Well, so what are we going to do? The Cantor. I don't know. Tomorrow night is the eve of the high holidays. I am expected to lead the congregation in prayer. Zucker. Yes, I know. The Cantor. And it seems to me that if a man is going to lead the congregation in prayer, he should at least have some faith in God. Zucker. It seems that way to me too. The Cantor. Well, then how can I sing tomorrow night? Zucker. Well, listen, this is a serious business. I wouldn't presume to advise you on such a delicate spiritual issue. My advice is to go to our rabbi and get his advice. The Cantor. I couldn't do that, Zucker. Zucker. You couldn't? Why couldn't you? The Cantor. He is such a young man, Zucker, and I couldn't admit to him my loss of faith. It took all my courage to admit it to you. Zucker. He's a nice fellow. Naomi, please, if I could have a little jam. Naomi. Oh, didn't I put the jam on the table? Zucker. Well, now, if you don't want to go to our rabbi, do you know who you could go to? The Cantor. Who? Zucker. Rabbi Marcus of New York City. A sage on earth. Men in torment make pilgrimages from all over the world to this man. The Cantor. Rabbi Marcus is a learned man, a sage among sages. Zucker. May his name be blessed. The Cantor. May his merits hover over all of us. Zucker. The first thing tomorrow morning, you should go to the railroad station, get on the train, and go to New York to see Rabbi Marcus. I'll go with you. The Cantor. Why should you go with me? Am I a child to be led across the street by the hand? Zucker. Naomi, please, if I could have a little piece of lemon. Well, listen, Leon, I think the best idea would be if I wrote you out instructions how to get there. It's a little complicated, and a simple soul like you could wind up the Almighty One. Alone knows where. You know, Listen, it's been a good couple of years since I myself went to New York. All right, Leon. The cantor. What? Zucker. Tomorrow morning, Leon, we'll take you down to the railroad station and we'll put you on the train. All right, when you get on the train, Leon, are you listening? The cantor. I'm listening. Zucker. When you get on the train, find a kindly-looking gentleman and tell him to put you off at East New York Station. Did you hear me, Leon? The cantor. I hear. Zucker. I wrote it down for you. East New York Station. The cantor. You don't have to write it down. There are plenty of people to ask. Zucker. All right. When you get to East New York Station, go to the Atlantic Avenue subway. Look for a subway guard. Go to the subway guard and say, Mister, I want the Manhattan train. Now, Leon, there are two trains. One goes to Manhattan and the other goes to Brooklyn. Tell the subway guard you want the train that goes to Manhattan, you hear? The cantor. I hear. Zucker. Not the Brooklyn train. The cantor. Not the Brooklyn train. Zucker. Manhattan. The cantor. Manhattan. Zucker. All right. Dissolve 2. Film. Long Island train pulling into station. Dissolve 2. Subway platform, people passing by subway guard. Cut 2. Long shot. Big, tall, magnificently impressive subway guard at far end of platform. Cut 2. The cantor makes his way down platform to the big, tall subway guard. The cantor tugging at guard's sleeve. Excuse me. Guard hardly knows he's there. Excuse me, please. Mister. Hey, mister. Guard turns slowly to him. Excuse me, but I would appreciate if you would put me on the train to Manhattan. I was told to stress to you the Manhattan train, not the Brooklyn train. The Manhattan train, please. The guard nods a little impatiently. A subway train slides to a halt in front of them. The door opens. The guard rather forcibly escorts the old cantor through the door. The door closes. The camera moves up on the placards in the window of the train. They read, New Lots Avenue, Brooklyn. The train begins to chug out. Cut 2. Close up. The cantor frowning a little nervously. He notices the Brooklyn placard in the window. The cantor, confused. Excuse me, is this the Brooklyn train or the Manhattan train? The question has been addressed to the air around him, but now he turns a little confused to find someone with whom he can verify his suspicion. Cut 2. Interior of subway car. Looking down the aisle toward one end. It is absolutely empty. The cantor takes a few tentative steps down the aisle. The cantor, calling lightly. Excuse me, anybody here could tell me, is this a Manhattan train or is this the Brooklyn train? Indicates the placards in the window. Seems to me this is the Brooklyn train. He stares helplessly around the empty car. Then he perches on the edge of the seat, frowning and at a loss. He folds his hands nervously between his knees. For a moment, he just sits there. And then, over the click-clack of the train, we hear faintly a woman sobbing. The old cantor looks up. The woman's sobbing again. The cantor rises slowly, moves slowly down the aisle, following the sobbing. He stops, stands motionless, looking. A pretty young woman in her 20s is standing by the open door at the end of the car. She is sobbing. She leans forward. Crescendo clacking train noise. Suddenly, she starts to loosen the guard chains and prepares to jump. The cantor grabs her. The cantor. Madam, what are you doing? Please, madam. She struggles for a moment, then stares at the cantor and flings herself onto his breast, sobbing. Dissolve 2. Film. Subway train hurtling along. Fade out film. Fade in. Hallway of a cheap, dark, dank boarding house. The cantor and the girl enter, cross to the end of the hall, and go into the girl's room. The cantor. 10 o'clock in the morning, and look how dark it is in here. Crosses to the window, lifts blind. What a depressing room. You should move away from here. Why don't you look for another room? The cantor moves across to her. Ah? The girl. Wasden? The cantor. I said you should look for another room. You shouldn't stay in a room like this. It's very depressing. The girl nods vacuously, stares down at her hands, folded limply in her lap. The cantor regards her for a moment, touched, concerned, and he takes the seat beside her. The cantor. So tell me, where in Holland are you from? The girl, tonelessly. Utrecht? The cantor. Utrecht? I was born not far from Utrecht. How do you like that? A little village called Landau. Do you know of it? The girl, momentarily interested, looks up, nods. Yes, I was born in Landau. I have still, I believe, 1 or 2 distant cousins living there. I remember once a month my mother would take me up to Utrecht to go to market. Even to this day I remember. It was a very lovely city. The girl, looking down at her hands. Ja? The cantor. Have you been very long in this country? The girl shakes her head. How long? The girl mutters. The cantor doesn't hear. He bends forward. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. The girl, stumbling between her Dutch and English. Dry week. The cantor. 3 weeks. And do you know anybody here? I mean, do you have friends or relatives or... The girl shakes her head bleakly. Well, now you know me, so that's one friend. The girl tries to smile her appreciation of the old cantor's sympathy, but her lips tremble, and she only succeeds in beginning to cry again. She quickly regains control of herself. The cantor, gently. Were you married? The girl, barely audible. Ja. The cantor, dead? The girl. Ja. The cantor. Children? The girl. Ja. Zwei, alle tot. The cantor. The Nazis? Were you in a concentration camp? The girl. Auschwitz. The cantor. The same sadness. Everywhere I look, the same sadness. The girl, mumbling. God. Close up tight on Cantor's face. The cantor. God? Dear young lady, there is no God. Fade out. Act 2. Fade in. Grandfather clock showing 11:30. Camera pulls away. We are back in the Sternberger home. The rooms are bright with the morning sun. Off in the kitchen, we see Naomi baking cookies. Suddenly, the phone rings. Naomi comes hurriedly out of the kitchen into the living room, picks up the phone. Naomi. Hello? Hello? Who? Who? Oh, Mr. Zucker. He's not home yet. No, I didn't hear nothing. What? The doorbell rings. Wait, the door just rang. Hold the wire a moment. She puts the telephone down, hurries to the door, opens it with an air of expectancy. Standing in doorway is a round little woman of 40 dressed in holiday fashion, especially a gaily plumed hat. This is Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis, beaming. Happy holiday. Naomi. A happy holiday. A happy year. Listen, Mrs. Davis, I'm on the telephone. Come in, please. Sit down. I'm talking on the phone. Naomi hurries back to the phone. Mrs. Davis comes in, closes the door, finds a seat. On phone. Hello? Hello, Mr. Zucker? No, it was Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis. All right. I'll call you as soon as he comes in. All right. Goodbye. Hangs up. Turns to Mrs. Davis. Excuse me, just 1 minute more, Mrs. Davis. I have cookies baking in the oven. Cinnamon cookies. Mrs. Davis. Go right ahead, Naomi. I just dropped in to tell you he's here. Naomi. Who's here? Mrs. Davis. Who's here? My brother is here. My brother from Cleveland. The one I told you about? The one with the jewelry store in Cleveland? Remember I told you my brother from Cleveland with the jewelry store? I was inviting him here for the holidays. I wanted you to meet him. Naomi, a little flustered. Oh, your brother from Cleveland with the jewelry store. Mrs. Davis. Yes. Naomi. Well, sit down, Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis perches on the edge of the overstuffed chair and folds her hands in her lap. Naomi sits down opposite Mrs. Davis and straightens out her skirt. Mrs. Davis. Naomi, I'm going to tell you something. George is a better match than I thought he was. Naomi. He is? Mrs. Davis. When I first mentioned him to you, Naomi, I told you he was not an especially good-looking fellow. But after all, he is a successful man with his own jewelry store, and he makes quite a good living. And after all, Naomi, you're 34 years old yourself. Naomi, 33. Mrs. Davis. 33? Well, anyway, I met him at the station, and in the 4.5 years that I haven't seen my brother George from Cleveland, I'm going to tell you something. He has gray hair on the sides, and he looks extremely dignified. Well, needless to say, Naomi, I have told him everything about you. What a marvelous and well-respected young woman you are, and how pious you are. The niece, after all, of our cantor. And believe me, I told George, a good-looking young woman. To my eyes, at least, you are a good-looking young woman. Naomi, blushing a little. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Let me get you a cookie. Naomi is immediately offered chair and into the kitchen. Mrs. Davis calls after her. Mrs. Davis. I also told him what a marvelous cook you are, and I can tell you he was bursting to meet you. Naomi pops back in from the kitchen with a plate and some cookies. Naomi. Well, do you think? Well, how? She collects herself. She draws herself up a little, gathers a little composure, and advances on Mrs. Davis with her plate of cookies. It so happened, of course, that the batter didn't come out so good this time. As a rule, I make a much tastier cookie. People tell me I have a talent for baking. She sits down again, looks down, a little embarrassed at her nervous fingers. I would like very much, Mrs. Davis, to meet your brother George from Cleveland with the jewelry store. Mrs. Davis. Naomi, I know you are asking yourself this very minute, is this brother of Mrs. Davis a devout man? Naomi. Well, Mrs. Davis. I mean, after all, you're the cantor's niece. It's perfectly legitimate that the cantor's niece, when she considers a match, has to take into account the spiritual character of the man. Naomi. Listen, Mrs. Davis. I'm 34 years old. Mrs. Davis. You just told me 33. Naomi. All right, you caught me. I'm really 34. And at 34, I'm not going to insist that my husband be a Talmudic scholar. Mrs. Davis. Well, I can tell you my brother George from Cleveland is a Talmudic scholar. My brother George is a devout man. Naomi. I would surely like to meet him. Mrs. Davis. And I mean devout. I mean, my brother George goes to a synagogue every day for morning prayers, for afternoon prayers, and for evening prayers. And he even fasts on days when it's not such a sin to nibble a bit of food here and there. I'm going to tell you, Naomi, my brother George is a fit husband for the niece of such a scholarly man as your uncle. Naomi. You make him sound so attractive that Well, how could a meeting be arranged? Mrs. Davis. He's right outside. Naomi. What do you mean he's right outside? Mrs. Davis. He's right outside, waiting in the car. Naomi. You left him waiting in the car? Mrs. Davis. Well, I didn't want to come barging in without giving you a little warning, a chance to put on a little lipstick. Naomi, up and all excited again. Lipstick? Well, I mean, the poor fellow, to leave him sitting outside in the... Well, go call him in, Mrs. Davis. Go call him in. Look at me. Isn't this ridiculous? Mrs. Davis. Don't be so excited, Naomi. I've already told him all about you. He's just as nervous as you are. Naomi, herding Mrs. Davis to the door. You better go call him in. Mrs. Davis exits into the street. Naomi closes the door after her, then thinks better of it, opens the door a little. She takes a few steps back into the living room, frowns, tries to get a grip on herself. She notices the kitchen towel lying on the table, picks it up, stuffs it into her apron. Then she realizes the apron is no costume in which to greet Brother George from Cleveland. Hurriedly takes it off, looks nervously around for some place to put it, finally throws it into the grandfather clock. At this point, there is a knock, and the door opens. Mrs. Davis comes in, followed by a pleasant man of 40-odd, just a little bit ill at ease, but likewise keeping a good grip on himself. Naomi turns to greet them. Naomi, please come in. Please come in. Mrs. Davis. Naomi, this is my brother George from Cleveland with the jewelry store. Naomi. How do you do? George. Happy holiday. Naomi. Happy holiday, happy year. Mrs. Davis. George, sit down over there. Naomi. Yes, please sit down. They enter and find seats at the table. George. I'm sure that this is a big interruption to you and an imposition on your time, but my sister insisted we drive over to see you. Naomi. Sure. And we left you sitting out there in the car. And Mrs. Davis, extending the cookie plate to George. George, have one of these cookies. Naomi just made them right out of the oven. George. Thank you. He takes a cookie. For some reason, a silence falls on the three as he takes a bite. This is very, very, very good. I really mean it. This is an extremely tasty cookie. Naomi, thank you. For a moment, they just sit. A hush falls over them. Mrs. Davis. Well, look how we're sitting here, like children. Listen, we all know why we're here. Rising. Well, I'm going to leave you two. Talk a little. Make a date. Don't eat too many cookies, George, because we're having lunch in a couple of minutes. This time, I'll go wait in the car. George. All right, Sylvia, I'll be out shortly. Mrs. Davis goes to the door. Naomi. Goodbye, Mrs. Davis. George turns with a sweet smile to Naomi. George. Well, you have heard the case stated. I am 42 years old. I am established in business. I would like to get married. My sister tells me what a wonderful girl you are. Naomi. Well, I wouldn't say girl. I'm 34 years old. I would like to get married. I'm a good cook. At least people tell me I have a talent for cooking. Perhaps you would like to come to dinner some evening this week. George. I would like that very much. Naomi. Come on Monday. I would like you to meet my uncle. George. I'll be here. Naomi. Let's see. What can I tell you about myself? George. My goodness, you don't have to tell me anything about yourself. I'm the one who should make myself attractive to you. Naomi. Is there to be a question of dowry? George. Dowry? Naomi. My uncle makes only a modest income. George. Naomi, is it I who should bring a dowry to you? For heaven's sakes, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be considered a suitor for your hand. You are a cantor's niece. To me, honestly, I tell you, it is the greatest honor to marry into a Cantor's family. I don't know whether my sister told you, but I am a religious man. And to me, your uncle, I, I can hardly wait to hear him sing tonight. Let us talk no more of dowries. I have a comfortable business of my own. Let us talk no more of dowries. Dowries. Really, what a European thought. Naomi. To tell you the truth, I'm not a very modern person. George. To tell you the truth, neither am I. Naomi. Occasionally, I put on a little lipstick and even a little bit sinful, and that's how modern I am. George. I think we're going to be very happy together, Naomi. Naomi. Of course, it's hard to tell just the first time we meet, but it seems we have the same tastes. George. It seems that way to me, too. Listen, I'm going to be here for the rest of the holidays. We'll go to the movies. We'll go for rides. We'll discuss with each other. We'll see how compatible we are. I think this is going to be a good thing. Naomi. I think so too, George. George rises. Well, I'll see you in a synagogue tonight. I'd better go now because my sister is a nervous woman and she's waiting there. And Naomi. I'll look for you tonight. George at door. Fine. Goodbye, Naomi. Naomi. Goodbye. Goodbye. George exits. Naomi stands at the door for a moment, strangely expressionless. And she begins to smile. She doesn't quite know what to do with herself. She shuffles aimlessly back into the room. She is beginning to hum a Hasidic wedding dance. She sits at the table. The humming picks up. She begins to rock slightly back and forth in rhythm to her humming. Slowly the wedding dance swells within her, and in a moment she is on her feet, stamping and whirling, her skirts flaring about her as she executes several steps from a European wedding dance. As suddenly as she started, she stops. She sits down again, still smiling a vague, aimless smile. The door behind her suddenly opens. The cantor enters. She whirls to him. Naomi. Uncle Leon. Uncle Leon, how are you? Did you see the famous rabbi? What happened? Did it go all right? The cantor. I didn't even go. I got on the wrong train. The subway guard there put me on the wrong train. Naomi. Listen, Uncle Leon, you know Mrs. Davis, who has the brother in Cleveland? They were here just 5 minutes ago. Maybe you saw them when you came in. The cantor. It was an omen. An omen. It was meant for me to meet that girl. Naomi. I invited him here Monday for dinner. What shall I make? Shall I make a roast? Or an old-fashioned chicken dinner with noodle soup? For the first time, the cantor is aware that he and Naomi are shouting about different things. He stares at his niece. The cantor. What are you talking about? What noodle soup? Naomi. They were here just 5 minutes ago. The cantor. Who? Naomi. Mrs. Davis and her brother from Cleveland. His name is George. The cantor. What Cleveland? What are you telling me of Cleveland? I'm telling you about a girl on the subway. He whirls away from her, furious, opens the door to his room, strides in. Cleveland. What is she telling me of Cleveland? Naomi follows him a step into his room. Naomi. Uncle Leon, I think I've made a match. A match. Mrs. Davis talked to me about him some time ago, and now he has come here and we just met. And if after the high holy days we still like each other, then we will be married. Subject to your consent, of course, Uncle Leon. Oh, Uncle Leon, he seems so gentle. I'm sure you will like him. The old man stares at his niece, the news slowly registering. The cantor. Mrs. Davis's brother wants to marry you? Naomi. And a devout man. A man who fasts even when it is not required. He is so anxious to meet you. To tell you the truth, I think he was more anxious to meet you than he was to meet me. He is so determined to be a cantor's nephew. The cantor surveys his niece with swift compassion. The cantor. A cantor's nephew. But I am no longer a cantor, my child. I must go to the rabbi and tell him to find another cantor. You see, I was on the train there on my way to New York. Sits. It was the Brooklyn train, actually. The subway guard put me in the wrong train. There was a young woman there who was about to leap upon the tracks when I stopped her. She told me a story that made me tremble. I didn't even go to see Rabbi Marcus. What for? To what purpose? What could he say to me? What arguments could he have put up against that poor unfortunate girl? I don't believe in God, and that's all. I am no longer a cantor. I am an atheist. If Mrs. Davis's brother is so devout, I do not think he will be so determined to be my nephew. Naomi, I don't understand exactly what you're talking about, Uncle Leon. The cantor. I am saying that Mrs. Davis's brother will not come to dinner on Monday. The soup will be as molten lead in his mouth, and he will revolt at the chicken. You are cursed with a disillusioned uncle, my child. Men of piety will turn away from you. If this young man is so devout, he will not marry you, Naomi. You must prepare yourself for his denial. Naomi, I don't understand how one day you can believe in God and the next day you can't. The cantor. My dear child, do you think I understand? Naomi. Mrs. Davis's brother is only going to be here till the end of the holidays. Couldn't you reserve your decision on God for just for 2 weeks, just till the day after, just till after the Day of Atonement? The cantor. Naomi, what do you want from me? Am I not in torment as it is? Naomi looks at him, rises, slowly crosses and sits on the bed. The cantor watches her. He reaches half-heartedly for his prayer book, opens it at random, knits his brow and tries to pray. Naomi watches anxiously. The cantor. Who is this that darkeneth counsel, but words without knowledge? Gird up thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? He snaps the book shut. No, I cannot lead the prayers tonight. It would be profane. I must go and tell the rabbi to find a substitute. He starts for the door, turns back to Naomi sympathetically. Well, perhaps he's not so devout. Perhaps he will forgive you a disillusioned uncle. Naomi. It's not so important, really. I just got a little excited there for a minute. Well, listen, I managed this long without a husband. I can manage longer. The cantor. If I believed in God, I should pray quite sharply to him about Mrs. Davis's brother. He starts for the door. Happy holiday, Naomi. Naomi. Happy holiday, happy year. The cantor exits. Naomi remains sitting on the bed, expressionless. Cut sharply to interior, the rabbi's study. This is a small room with a flat desk, pictures of bearded patriarchs on the wall, and piles of books all around. The rabbi himself is seated at the desk, poring over what should be a book of Talmudic lore. He is a young man in his 30s with the clergyman's air of premature wisdom. He wears a sober suit of Oxford gray. There is a knock on the door. The rabbi. Yes? The door opens and Zucker pokes his head in. Zucker. Rabbi? The rabbi. Yes, Zucker, what? Zucker slips into the room, closes the door behind him. Zucker. Cantor Sternberger is here. He would like to see you a minute. The rabbi. Is it important? Zucker. I think you should see him right away. The rabbi. Is something wrong? Zucker shrugs. He says he's lost his faith in God. The rabbi regards Zucker with a mildly startled eye. The rabbi. He's lost his faith in God? Zucker. He doesn't believe in God anymore. The rabbi. Cantor Sternberger? Zucker. His niece called me up last night. She says my uncle is sick. So I went over. I said, Leon, what's the matter? So he says, Zucker, I have lost my faith in God. Well, what can you say when somebody says something like that to you? The rabbi. Well, what did you say? Zucker. I disputed with him. In the end, we decided he should go see Rabbi Marcus of New York. Well, I don't know what happened, but he did not see Rabbi Marcus. And he is sitting in the synagogue now, and he tells me we'll have to get another cantor. The rabbi. Cantor Sternberger? Zucker. 30 minutes past 12 before the eve of the high holidays, he tells me we'll have to get another cantor. The services start at 16 minutes past 7. Who can we get on such short notice? The rabbi. Zucker, please, really. Zucker. Well, then who shall sing? Schulman, the butcher, perhaps, who likens himself unto an opera singer? He has a voice like a frog. Well, really, we shall be without a cantor tonight, I assure you. What is Rosh Hashanah without a cantor? A wedding without a bride. The rabbi goes out into the corridor and across into the synagogue proper. He is followed by Zucker. They both slowly approach the cantor, who is now sitting, abject and bowed, on one of the rear benches. The rabbi. Peace be with you, cantor. The rabbi seats himself beside the old man. What is it, Leon? Why are you troubled? The cantor. Rabbi, I can't sing tonight. I feel empty. I feel naked and hollow. God was my life. Now, nothing. What was my day but the simple rituals of my religion? I would awaken in the morning and hurry through the streets to the synagogue to don my long white praying shawl and my phylacteries. And it seemed to me, Rabbi, that God was shaking my hand and wishing me good morning. Was it sacrilegious, Rabbi, to have felt so friendly with God? The rabbi, gently with deep compassion. No, of course not, Leon. The cantor. I don't feel him around me anymore. I wouldn't recognize him if he passed me on the street. The rabbi. Was it not Micah who stated, and ye shall meet him in the strangest places? The cantor. No, Rabbi. Excuse me. The quotation is actually attributed to Zechariah, and it states, and ye shall know him in the strangest costumes and in the strangest places. The rabbi. Well, Zechariah then, so be it. The cantor. So, Rabbi, I have come to tell you that you shall have to get another cantor. I would suggest Mr. Schulman the butcher, who was helpful on those occasions when I was ill. Zucker, who has been impatiently listening to the disputation between the cantor and the rabbi, now bursts out. Zucker. Schulman the butcher? He will drive the congregation from the temple. Really, on Rosh Hashanah we should have a cantor. One holiday of the year there should be singing. Rabbi, I am not a scholar, but I would like to raise a question of rabbinical law. The rabbi. Yes, Zucker, what is it? Zucker. Rabbi, what, in essence, is the cantor? Is he a religious functionary who must have faith to perform his duties, or is he merely a hired employee of the congregation? For is it not written in the commentaries, Rabbi, that employees of the congregation need not be devout? This is the issue I would pose to you for clarification. The rabbi. It's a casuistic issue, Zucker. It is clearly stated by Rabbi Gamaliel that the cantor is as a teacher to the congregation, even as a rabbi. But on the other hand, Zucker. Yes, Rabbi? The rabbi. Does not the cantor of the congregation have a social obligation like a mayor or a policeman to fulfill his duties even though he is ill or taken with disease? Indeed, is not the loss of faith to a cantor even so much as the death of a loved one to a civil functionary? This is a very interesting point. I would have to study the commentaries for a precedent. Zucker. It's 12:30, Rabbi. We don't have time to study the commentaries. The Rabbi. It's an issue I'm not adequate to judge. I would suggest that Cantor Sternberger go to New York and present the issue to Rabbi Marcus. Zucker. A sage on earth. The Cantor. Actually, Rabbi, I was on my way down to see. The Rabbi, nodding. Yes, that is the best solution. Well then, Leon, you will go to Rabbi Marcus and you will pose him the following question. Which deserves first consideration? The social obligations of the Cantor's position or the religious requirements? Do you understand, Leon? The Cantor. I understand, all right. It's just that The Rabbi to Zucker. Zucker, take the Cantor down to the station because I really don't think there is too much time. Does he know how to get to New York? Zucker. Rabbi, I'll give him instructions, don't worry. The Cantor. What's the matter with you? How many times are you going to give me these instructions? Zucker. Leon, I'm going to put you on the train. Ask somebody to put you off at East New York Station. Do you want me to write it down for you? The Cantor. You don't have to write it down. Zucker. All right. When you get to Atlantic Avenue, look for a subway guard. Say to the guard, I want to stress this point, say to him, please put me on the Manhattan train. The Cantor. Manhattan. Zucker. Not the Brooklyn train. The Cantor. Not the Brooklyn train, but both. The Manhattan train. Dissolve 2. Film clip. Long Island train pulling into station. Dissolve 2. The subway platform. The Cantor walks down the platform looking for the subway guard. The big, tall guard is at the end of the platform. The Cantor comes up to him. The Cantor. Tugging at the guard's sleeve. Excuse me, mister? Hey, mister, you remember me? I came over to you this morning. I asked you to put me on the Manhattan train, remember? And you made a mistake. You put me on the Brooklyn train. Well, listen, even if you don't remember, please, this time don't make a mistake. I want you to put me on the Manhattan train, not the Brooklyn train. The Manhattan train. Now don't make a mistake, please. The guard nods. The subway train comes roaring into the station. The doors open. The subway guard pushes the old Cantor onto the train. Cut to interior subway train. The old Cantor looks quickly at the placards in the car window. They read, New Lots Avenue, Brooklyn. Close up, the Cantor, furious. He runs for the door. The door closes in his face. Sound of train picking up steam. Train starts into motion. Close up, the old Cantor's face covered with futility pressed against subway car window as train slowly moves out of focus. Fade out. Act 3. Fade in. Interior subway car. The old Cantor just snorting with exasperation. He looks down length of subway car, again strangely empty except for a young man who sits quietly reading a newspaper. The Cantor perches on seat opposite the young man, but he cannot remain seated long. He sighs angrily once or twice, folds and unfolds his hands, suddenly stands, goes to the door, stops, stares at the young man. He is bursting to tell his exasperation to somebody. Finally, he can no longer resist. He goes to the young man, sits down beside him and speaks. The Cantor. Excuse me, mister. Hey, listen, you want to hear something? The young man looks up from his paper. This is something should be complained about. This is something crazy. Let me tell you what happened. The young man regards the Cantor with polite interest. This morning, I got on the train to go to New York. So I came over to the subway guard and I said to him, please put me on the Manhattan train. Well, He put me on the train. I look up. I see it's the Brooklyn train. Obviously, he made a mistake. Well, what can you do about it? We're all human. We can all make mistakes. But just now I came over to the same subway guard, a big, tall, husky fellow, looks like a general. Perhaps you saw him standing there? No? The young man. I'm not speaking English too good. The cantor. No? The young man shaking his head. No, I am in this country a small time. The cantor. Ah, so. Are you Dutch? The young man. Yeah. The cantor. I thought so. I recognize the accent. I'm of Dutch birth myself. I came to this country at the age of 16. The young man. Oh, yes? The cantor. Yes. The young man. I'm from the city of Utrecht. The cantor. Utrecht? Isn't that strange? I come from a small village about 10 kilometers from Utrecht. My mother used to take me to Utrecht on market days as a child. And just this morning I met a young woman, also Dutch, recently arrived in this country. It's remarkable how many times I have heard the name Utrecht today. Utrecht! What a lovely city. The young man. I remember only sad things in Utrecht. My wife, my children, all dead. My wife in Auschwitz. I myself in labor camp for a year. I come back, all dead. The old cantor has been frowning during this stumbling recital. The cantor. Auschwitz? Did you say your wife was in Auschwitz? The young man. Yeah. The cantor. Of course, this is foolish, but could you tell me, was your wife's name Maria? The young man suddenly alert. Yes. Maria, do you know of her? The cantor. Well, this is a very remarkable thing, perhaps. I don't know. Did you have 2 children, and did you live with your mother-in-law? The young man, excited. Yes, yes. The cantor. Is your wife a tall, handsome woman? The young man, half standing, shouting. Yes. Do you know of her? The cantor. The young man. For heaven's sakes, my friend, who are you? The cantor, his eyes blinking with confusion. My friend, we are coming to a station. Would you come with me to a telephone? Close up, the frantic young man staring wide-eyed at the cantor. Cut sharply to a wall telephone ringing in the hallway outside Maria's room. Camera moves down hallway into Maria's room. Ringing continues off. Camera moves slowly across the room to bed. Maria lies on bed, her arms rigidly at her sides. Only sign of life is her open eyes, and they stare fixedly at the ceiling. Cut sharply to subway phone booth. White tiles. The cantor is pressed to the phone. The young man hovers over him. The cantor. Of course, this is a little fantastic, and you mustn't put too much hope in this. I just met the girl for a few moments this morning and... Hello? Hello? There doesn't seem to be any answer. The young man. Please, let us wait a little longer. The cantor. The phone is in the hallway, and she may not hear it. Cut sharply to hallway outside Maria's room. The phone is still ringing. A woman of 50 or so, wearing an old woolen bathrobe with towel around her neck and hair in curlers, comes to the phone and picks it up. The woman. Hello? Hello? What do you want? What? Maria who? There's nobody named Maria here. Cut sharply to cantor and subway booth. The cantor. Madam, if you would only knock on her door just down the hall, just see if she's in. Cut sharply to the woman. The woman. Oh, that one. Well, she went out this morning. I saw her go myself. All right, just a minute. The woman shuffles down hall to Maria's door. Knocks. No answer. Turns and goes back to phone. Picks up receiver. Well, she's not in. I told you she wasn't in. Goodbye. She's about to hang the receiver up. Cut to Maria's door open. Maria stands there. Maria. Did you knock, please, missus? The woman. There's a phone for you. Lets the receiver drop from her hand to dangle by its wire. Turns and walks away. Cut sharply to the cantor and the young man in the phone booth. The cantor about to hang up. She doesn't seem to be home. The girl's voice unfiltered through receiver. Hello? Hello? The cantor looks down at the receiver in his hand, picks it up again, puts it to his ear. The cantor. Hello, could I please speak to a girl named Maria? Oh, this is Cantor Sternberger. Do you remember? This morning, yes. Listen, my dear, a strange thing has happened to me, and I was wondering if you could answer, if you could tell me. My dear, was your married name Rakin? What? He turned slowly to look at the young man in the booth with him. The receiver pressed against his ear. Was his first name Leopold? Please don't be excited, madam. If you will hold the wire for a moment, madam, please. He puts a hand on the young man's arm. My friend, do not be excited, but a miraculous thing is going to happen to you. Extends the phone receiver to the young man. Here. You are going to talk to your wife. The young man takes the receiver tentatively, swallows, squeezes to the phone. The young man. Hello? Then in Dutch. This is Leopold Rakin. Am I talking to my wife, Maria? Suddenly the tense restraint leaves the young man, and he screams in Dutch into the phone. Maria, this is Leopold. How are you, my darling? How are you? Where are you? Maria, where? His eyes are glistening, and he can hardly restrain his emotion, beginning to cry. Maria. Cut to the cantor, a beaming spectator. Then slowly the expression of delight passes to one of troubled introspection. He cocks his head in concentration. Cut to film subway train hurtling through the dark tunnels. Dissolve to interior of subway car, this time with usual crowd. Men and women hanging from straps, swaying to motion of car, others reading newspapers. Camera pushes its way through field of bodies to the cantor who sits still wrapped in thought. A man reading a newspaper sits next to him. He touches the arm of the man. The man scowls at him. The cantor. Excuse me. The man. What do you want? The cantor, thinking aloud. The most extraordinary thing happened to me today. On 2 separate occasions. The man impatiently. What do you want? The cantor. On 2 separate occasions, I was pushed into the wrong train. And now that I come to think of it, it seems to me that on both times the car was strangely empty. The man. Look, Mac, you don't like it here? Why don't you take a taxi? What are you bothering me for? Who am I, Impellitteri? He angrily returns to glowering at his newspaper. The cantor, still thinking aloud, obsessed with his thoughts. And isn't it the most remarkable coincidence? Absolutely fantastic. That on the first time on the wrong train I should meet a wife who has lost her husband. And then on the second time I should meet the husband who has lost his wife. What a remarkable thing. Guard's voice off. Atlantic Avenue. Change here for Long Island trains. The conductor's voice jerks the old canter back to reality. There is a sweeping motion through the subway car, and as the door slides open, the old canter is carried out onto the platform on the wave of outgoing passengers. Here, on the platform, he looks about for the tall subway guard. People pass around him, whizzing in every direction. At last, the old canter sees the subway guard. This one, however, is a much shorter chap. Nevertheless, the old canter wends his way over to him. Short guard calling out, "Atlantic Avenue, change here for Long Island trains." The canter, "Excuse me, my friend." Short guard, "Step along, Atlantic Avenue, change here for Long Island." Ad lib, etc. Turns. "Yeah, what is it?" The canter, "My friend, I am looking for that big, tall subway guard that was here the earlier part of the day." Short guard, ad libs to crowd, then turns to canter. "What'd you say?" The canter, "I said, could you tell me where I could find that big, tall subway guard, the very big fellow, the one that looked like a general?" Short guard, "Not on this platform. I'm the only guard on this platform. I've been here all day." The canter, "My friend, I tell you, I had occasion to talk to the man twice. This is the Atlantic Avenue station, isn't it?" Short guard, "Yes, this is the Atlantic Avenue station." The canter, "Then there must be a tall subway guard." Short guard, "Mister, I've been on this platform since 8 this morning, and there ain't been no other guard here." The canter, "You mean there was no other guard?" Short guard, "No other guard." Ad lib exits. The canter standing alone, frowning. The big, tall fellow. He had the guard has turned away and is moving down the platform. The canter stares after him, his eyes widening. Close up, the canter. The canter. "And ye shall know him in the strangest costumes and in the strangest places." He looks up the direction of the sky, then quickly down again. He hunches his shoulders and starts quickly down the platform. Fade out. Fade in. Candles. The synagogue. The cantor stands facing the pulpit. He raises his voice in the age-old intonations of the service. He wears his white robes. As the music swells, cut to George in his prayer shawl, listening. Then cut to Naomi and some of the ladies listening. Then to Zucker in his prayer shawl and some of the other men listening. Cut back to the cantor. He turns slowly to face the congregation. His eyes are glistening. The choral voices crescendo up into a roar. Fade out. The end. Holiday Song and Adaptation. Holiday Song was ostensibly an adaptation. That is to say, I was given the basic story and asked to adapt it to an hour script. I am not good at adaptation, and my final draft was only vaguely related to the original property. In television, the writer is paid considerably less for an adaptation than he is for an original script, on the premise that the idea for the story, its characters and incidents, are already provided him. Actually, the material to be adapted is rarely of any use to the adapter. It is usually in the shape of a novel or a short story, two literary forms that do not lend themselves comfortably to dramatic exploitation. The convenient introspection of the prose style is difficult to capture in dialogue and action, and the adapter usually winds up picking a kernel of story from his material and improvising his own characters and insights. Occasionally, the writer is asked to create a drama based upon some magazine article or newspaper item. This was the case in Holiday Song. The material provided me was a short article in Reader's Digest entitled "It Happened on the Brooklyn Subway." It dealt with a photographer, a man of confirmed habit who always took the same train into New York every morning. One day, on a sudden impulse, he decided to visit a friend in Brooklyn and switched to the Brooklyn train. The train was packed, but by chance, the passenger seated in front of him left the car and the photographer took his place. Seated next to him was a young man reading a Hungarian newspaper. Being Hungarian himself, the photographer struck up a conversation. The young fellow told a harrowing tale of having been in Nazi concentration camps. There was something familiar in the story to the photographer. A few months before, he had met a Hungarian girl who had told him very much the same sort of experience. On a hunch, the photographer called the girl, who turned out to be the young fellow's long-lost wife. The author of the article drew the conclusion that God had been riding the Brooklyn subway that day. The incident is not a good one for dramatic purposes. Despite the fact that it involves bringing together a husband and wife who believed each other dead, there is little emotion involved. There is a certain element of suspense, but suspense is a poor substitute for drama. It would be possible to use this incident as the opening scene of a story and then follow the course of events resulting from the meeting of a long-separated husband and wife. But this isn't what the subway incident is about. The incident has only one dramatic meaning, and that is, there is a God. The incident is what I call a third act incident. It proves something. If in the beginning of the play there was a character who didn't believe in God, then this incident could prove to him that there is. Of course, the character would have to be someone who would accept such a symbolic interpretation of the incident. And as a writer, it is your job to create such a character. Now the wheels begin to turn. What sort of man would construe this chance meeting on a subway as a machination of God? Certainly, he would have to be a man of pronounced religious conviction, almost to the point of naivete. Your photographer, then, has to be a deeply religious man. But the line of your story dictates that he begin the story as a man who doesn't believe in God so that he can mature to some new conviction by the end of the story. So then, he must be a deeply religious man who has lost his faith. Now you are beginning to poke around in genuine dramatic areas. A religious man who has lost his faith in God is a good character to explore. So you have the first and last scenes of your show. You open your script showing a religious photographer who has lost his faith in God. And you end your script with this subway incident which restores his faith to him. What is missing is the story, or what I call the urgency. Why is it so urgent that the photographer regain his faith in God? What terrible consequence will occur if he doesn't? As a writer, you sit down and painfully invent a series of circumstances that will be resolved by this incident on the subway. I do not mean to make this an exercise in story construction. Actually, the construction of Holiday Song is not a good one for television. It is much too complex and mechanically active and is better suited for a movie. All that I want to bring out is how far afield an adaptation wanders. Except in only occasional cases, the creative processes of adaptation follow the same tortured, stumbling steps required in the creation of an original story. Frequently, the material is to be adapted, as in the article assigned to me, provides no characters at all. Or if there have been delineated characters, they are usually impossible to accept. Writing is a highly personalized business. Each writer feels differently about a situation, and certainly no other writer would have adapted the subway incident quite as I did. I happen to be Jewish, and my understanding of the religious emotion is limited to the Jewish ritual. So my leading character automatically became Jewish. At the same time I sat down to this adaptation, I was governed by an almost compulsive interest in Jewish folklore and humor. I had been wanting to write a show about synagogue life for years. I think that it was beyond my conscious control to keep from imposing this long-repressed synagogue story onto this adaptation. In the end, I had written what amounts to a completely or almost completely original work. Certainly, the work that went into the writing was no less intense than if I had started out cold on an original idea. Holiday Song was the first hour television show I wrote, and it shows a lack of awareness of the television medium. I approached the script as I would have approached a movie. I actually patterned the story after a French film called The Baker's Wife. I wanted to tell a charming folktale about a small Jewish community struck by the catastrophe of its cantor refusing to sing for the high holidays. In the final version, it is apparent that the concept of the community disappeared and the story was sliced down to the less involved story of an old man who has lost his faith in God. I meant the show to be a comedy after the fashion of Shalom Aleichem, but it came out a rather ponderous spiritual message. The celebrated actor Joseph Buloff played the leading role and was an incredible success. To my mind, Mr. Buloff was not quite accurate in the role. I meant the cantor to be a simple old man who knew how to get from his house to the synagogue and back again, and nothing more, so that to make a 30-mile subway trip to New York was much like the pilgrimages made by devout Jews of the last century to the High Rabbi of Wilno. I saw the old man as a wan little scholar, confused outside the sheltered confines of his synagogue. Mr. Buloff, who has great charm as an actor, was nevertheless too strong for the role. He came out an imposing intellectual, and the net result was to give the play a weight that should never have been there. This is, of course, my own opinion, and I have yet to find 5 people who will agree with me. Holiday Song was a fantastic success, measured by television standards. Mr. Buloff received more than 4,000 letters, and Ben Gross, the television editor of the New York Daily News, suggested that the show be done annually at high holiday time. And I am afraid it may well be. In the production of Holiday Song, the thing to guard against is extravagance. The thing to guard against is extravagance. It is only natural for actors to play their lines for all they are worth, and I have met only a few directors who have the taste and delicacy to keep the actors within the bounds of realism. Directors, indeed, usually have a passion for the theatrical themselves, searching into the scripts for explosive moments and intense close-ups. Holiday Song can easily degenerate into a mawkish piece of sogginess. The main element of comedy has to be stressed to avoid plunging into cheap tragedy. The fact that the cantor has lost his faith in God is not a heavy thought. Among Jews especially, religion has a highly intellectual quality. The second act scene, for example, where the rabbi and Zucker engage in a Talmudic discussion was intended to be rank comedy. Perhaps a better clue to the basic level of the show lies in the first scene of the play when the cantor first confesses his loss of faith to Zucker. The actor playing Zucker will inevitably stare aghast as the cantor, Blanche, perhaps turn aside in terror at this awful confession. Actually, Zucker doesn't know quite what the cantor is talking about. It would be as if the cantor had announced to Zucker that he had just jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge and broken every bone in his body. Zucker's would obviously be, "What are you talking about? I don't see any broken bones." Anyway, just what does it mean to lose your faith in God? Faith being a nebulous thing, how do you lose it? Zucker should be played in this scene much like the man in the talking horse stories. He is aware that something extraordinary is going on, but he isn't quite sure what it is. The quality of Holiday Song is that of the folktale, European and never more than poignant. It is a gimmicky kind of show, that is, its plot is more important than its characterizations. Another thing to be guarded against is the tendency of serious actors to make more out of their parts than is called for. Actors, like everyone else, like to think of themselves as creative artists, and if they want to, they can develop the most complicated characterizations. The characters in Holiday Song are no more than the words indicate them to be. Some of the scenes are little more than burlesque sketches. especially the little routines between the cantor and Zucker in which the latter gives subway instructions to the former. You need real professional actors for this kind of improvisation. Men who have played vaudeville and a lot of comedy. In this kind of thing, nobody in the world is much better than Mr. Buloff. Generally speaking, Holiday Song is a comedy. Seen in the smallness of a living room, it may play with no more than a smile, but in front of a house audience it should get continual laughter. Under any circumstances, this should be the basic approach to it.